So welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much, Azeem, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
So, Azeem, health tech feels like a new craze. We see all over the media about the latest AI, the latest digital health innovation, the latest wearable that promises to kind of change the healthcare landscape. Um, but in your words, what actually is health tech? And is it just another buzzword, or does it truly represent the future of medicine?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'd say there's no kind of one consensus as to the definition of health tech, and then people try and then separate health tech from med tech, from digital health, and it all gets quite confusing. Broadly speaking, I'd say it's the use of either hardware or software to impact patient care positively at scale. So the use of innovation in whatever guise and kind of as broadly as possible to impact patient care either directly or indirectly. So I've tried to keep it as broad as I can there, intentionally, because it does encompass a huge amount. But as I said, kind of both hardware, both software, and anything from patient workflows to the use of endovascular devices and surgeries. Like I think that there is a huge breadth. And in terms of whether it's a buzzword, I'd say in recent years, in terms of as a career path, it's become a buzzword. So medical students, clinicians, particularly who are a little bit disgruntled with the state of the NHS, say, "Oh, there's consulting, there's pharma, and there's health tech." And because health tech is probably the most nuanced of those three spaces and the least defined, it's often kind of banded about as almost a buzzword. But I think the space is still relatively nascent and it's developing in and of itself. But I think it's early days, essentially, in my opinion, in terms of what health tech, particularly in the UK, looks like and what it's even going to look like in the next few years.
Yeah, it's interesting because me and Yasmin, we talk to lots of medical students. We are medical students at the moment, and everyone's interested in health tech, med tech, digital health, all of these words that kind of don't really know how to delineate. Yeah, everyone wants a slice of it. It's like a big craze. Why? Why do you think that is? Why has that happened? Is it because we're currently in an era where that is just the sort of mode of development that we're seeing in healthcare,
Mm.
or is it something else?
I guess there's probably a few components. I mean, when I graduated med school, which is an embarrassingly long time ago now, so 8 years ago, which is, as I said, embarrassing to say, but this whole craze of, I guess, clinicians, medical students being interested in the space, it didn't really exist in the same way. And, the big kind of company that came out in the over the last decade or so, which is Babylon, which multi-billion-pound valuation and ultimately didn't succeed in its goal. I think I would say that kind of somewhat paved the way for this kind of craze almost that is now occurring. A lot of the really influential, particularly clinicians within the digital health space in the UK, started off at Babylon. Actually, I can name four or five, friends of mine as well who went down the Babylon route and now work at, Google, OpenAI, Scarlet. Like the list goes on. So I think there are definitely companies which have set a trend, and then I think it's also a little bit of the contrast between the unfortunate state of the NHS right now amongst clinicians particularly. They then are trying to look at something else that they have little experience of that is seen as quite sexy and quite novel, particularly in this realm of and this era of AI that we're living in. And I almost see it as a dichotomy. Like NHS work is boring and a big struggle, and it's really really challenging from an innovation perspective. But digital health and health tech is something that is new, novel, and exciting. I think time will tell kind of how the space is going to develop in the next few years. But I think money is still flowing into UK and European health tech, thankfully, and there have been some successful companies, but the number of health tech or digital health exits are few and far between. I actually wouldn't be able to name any off the top of my head over the last year or so. I'm sure they exist, but I think it's important to take hype into account and understand how much of this is hype and how much of this is real. There is no one answer to that. But as I said, I think we'll see in the broader context of like this AI bubble that we're living in as well, whether that truly is a bubble, whether it's going to burst, and how healthcare is going to be impacted if or when that occurs.
Mm. Kind of talking about that, you've mentioned a couple of times the current landscape of health tech in the UK. For those of our listeners who don't really know what that's like at the moment, who maybe are just getting started to getting their heads around what health tech is, how would you describe it at the moment? And then you've also mentioned kind of the future of health tech. So where do you think it's going? And it'd be interesting to hear your perspectives, especially comparing ourselves to the US and how the US maybe is, propelling health tech maybe even further, because I'm hearing a lot about, for example, the difficulties with implementing health tech into the UK due to regulations, etc., especially within the NHS. It'd be great to hear your perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably like a whole 4-hour workshop in terms of trying to dive deeper into. I guess there's a few different questions in there. We ran a workshop with the Lord Mayor about a year or so ago, which was trying to unpick what you've asked here, and it is incredibly complicated because you have the regulatory side of things. Like if you were to ask anyone building a health tech company in the UK, I'd say 9 out of 10 would say that the process of obtaining regulatory approval in the UK is probably the number one blocker to developing innovation within healthcare in the UK, and regulators are chronically underfunded as well. You've got commercialization models which are inherently broken in this country. Not, least of all the fact that our government works in obviously 4 yearly cycles. So you need to have a framework in place which encourages a longitudinal, longer term approach to how you deliver innovation into healthcare. But because our government is somewhat short sighted, because our cycles are relatively short, the impetus to actually develop longer term innovation and say, actually, we have a 10-year plan. A lot of this is large and nebulous and somewhat, I wouldn't say meaningless, but kind of lacking practical steps that need to be
Yeah.
taken.
I was wondering what you thought. Yeah. What do you think of the 10-year plan? Is it just sort of words?
I mean, there are some interesting components to it. I haven't. I mean, I read it when it initially came out. I wouldn't actually be able to necessarily give you a ton of specifics from it that I'm a
Yeah.
massive fan of. In terms of, my mindset is very practical. I don't like. I don't know if it's ADHD. It probably is, but I don't like long words. I don't like long sentences which don't say very much. It's all about being as practical and pragmatic and action
Yeah.
focused as you possibly can. And a document like the 10-year plan, I'm sure, has some useful, practical, actionable points in there. But as with any long bureaucratic document, it has, like, it can lose my attention quite quickly. So I think in terms of like what the state of innovation in the NHS looks like, as I said, there's commercialization, there's regulation, there's how do you develop an actual grassroots startup ecosystem that is going to encourage further development of healthcare startups and startups generally. Two of the kind of my favorite things that government has ever done to encourage startups is like SEIS and EIS, tax relief for investment in startups in the UK. Beyond that, I wouldn't say there's like a huge number of incentives for developing startups in the UK anymore. There are grants, there are accelerators. They are not very transparent in how money is being delivered and are like largely incredibly bureaucratic as well. Anyway, the list goes on and on. So I think I'd say right now it's really challenging building in healthcare in the UK. It's part of the reason my first startup wasn't a healthcare or health tech company, is because you don't really want that to be your first startup, in my opinion. Like when people say, let's build a startup, let's move fast and break things. Well, you can't do that in healthcare because people will die. So I think it's someone, if you're going to build in this space, like there are a few anomalies of incredible companies like, Patchwork. And Jing, for example, is a good friend of mine. And this is essentially one of his, I think it's pretty much his first startup he's ever done. And he's been massively successful in rolling out Patchwork across the UK. But that is an anomaly. And it's incredibly rare to occur because of all the pitfalls in developing innovation and scaling it within the NHS. Like I haven't even got to how challenging it is to scale in the UK versus the US. I haven't really answered your question as to the differences because I could probably monologue for a little while longer as well. But hopefully that somewhat answers your question.
Can I ask a follow-up then, really quickly? Let's say you had to create a startup now.
Hmm.
Like it's a groundbreaking idea, etc. To maybe sum up, rather than answering that question, would you rather start it up in the UK or the US?
Within healthcare,
Yeah.
I think it once again I probably played to my my skills, my knowledge, and my network, all three of which probably largely still lie in the UK. But that would be somewhat playing it safe. That once again, there are incredible digital health companies that have done really well in the UK. Like I worked at Sarah, for example, which is a domiciliary tech company. And that is largely speaking now branding itself as a digital health company. But that was only able to scale because it became a care provider. So it was going into people's home and delivering care, and then it delivered its digital health tools within the care provision service that it had then raised money to develop. Really scaling a digital health product in the UK is incredibly challenging, but I don't have the skill sets or the knowledge to necessarily do it in the US. I'm kind of hedging my answer here. I'd say on balance, I'd probably try the UK first and see if there was even a method for trying to bring something to market. And in reality, what will end up happening as you're going down the process of trying to raise funds, trying to build, trying to find co-founders, and actually just fleshing out a pitch deck, I'll probably realize that this isn't the best approach and end up probably trying to target the US at that point. But I'd probably start with the UK because that's where my expertise lies.
Good answers. All good answers. There's so much nuance. You're used to this. I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, like if you get something wrong in healthcare and in health tech specifically, maybe people die. So I was wondering, I mean, it's almost like a seesaw, right? Like the speed of innovation counteracted with sort of the due diligence to make sure things are safe and fit for purpose. Where do you see that seesaw lying at the moment? I mean, you hinted at it, but is there a bit too much due diligence and regulatory sort of friction? Or is AI moving too fast? Or is it a bit of both?
I think there's an answer which is more general within, I guess if we're talking about AI specifically within the UK, and then there's a more specific answer within healthcare. I would say generally when it comes to AI on a global scale, there is such little funding going into regulation, and that like massively concerns me. I can't remember the exact statistic, but something like 0.x% of global funding in AI is going towards regulation at the moment. And we are hurtling towards this concept of developing AGI and ASI, and companies are funneling hundreds of billions of dollars to develop new types of AI and for listeners who don't understand what those
which is me as well, yeah.
AGI is artificial general intelligence, which is essentially, right now we have specialized intelligence systems which are, focused on specific tasks, like a chatbot, for example. Whereas generalized artificial intelligence is how do you essentially give a computer system consciousness to the same level as human consciousness. I won't go into all of the challenges with doing that, including defining consciousness, which is in and of itself its own challenge. That's AGI. And then ASI is artificial superintelligence, which is a whole other kind of kettle of fish in terms of developing a computer system which has even larger capacities for intelligence than a human could. And both of those have intrinsically really, really great risks, as some of the greatest AI researchers of all time have come out and are really actively making it clear what these risks are. And this is not like a nuclear arms race, which is we need to develop nuclear weapon before someone else because who knows what the risk is going to be, and we have to have mutually assured destruction. This isn't like that, because if you develop AGI, for example, which is a conscious AI system, we don't know what that looks like because we haven't really defined what it looks like. Everyone will come up with a different definition of what AGI is. And secondly, it's not like you're clicking a button and launching a nuclear weapon. This is a system which we are not even sure we necessarily know how we're going to be able to control it. So is there enough regulation in AI globally right now? Absolutely not. Are there enough people researching regulation and how we're going to control AGI systems if/when they're ever developed? Initially, we said 2027. Now it's probably 2028. No, we don't. So that's AI generally. Now in healthcare, the next question within the question you asked is, can there ever be too much regulation, and can there ever be too much red tape within healthcare? The answer to that, I would say, is yes. There can be too much regulation. There can be bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. But we need to be incredibly strict with the technologies that we develop and how they impact patients. Because this isn't like an AI chatbot for helping students learn GCSE maths, right? This is technology which is going to impact patient care. And particularly if it's a medical device, if it makes a mistake, people could be at significant harm. Right now, regulation is slow in the UK for, I'd say, I'm sure there are more than two reasons, but two main reasons is that technology is developing faster than regulators can even develop their own regulations. And you can tie in regulation, but also legal frameworks as well. The law cannot catch up, or the legal system cannot catch up with how fast AI is developing. That's kind of point number one when it comes to regulation in this space. And point number two, which hopefully I can remember, is that we have such little funding for regulators, as I said before, is that the space is moving so quickly. We don't have enough funding for regulators. And one of the key bottlenecks for startups developing innovation is therefore the regulators. So once again, I hope that somewhat answers your questions. It's nuanced in when whether we're talking about AI more generally or AI within healthcare. We obviously need to be so much more careful when we're developing anything within the healthcare space, whether it's AI or not.
Mm. Just then following up, so you mentioned ultimately one of the aspects is funding. Um, Now we know the NHS is already very much underfunded. So how can we go about this issue, considering the state of NHS? Is there a way we can actually overcome this?
I'm assuming we're kind of referring to is there a way that we can still fund innovation within the NHS despite the lack of funding available? Is that correct? It's a really tough question because once again, it requires a few things to fit into place. One of the key ones being, what are we optimizing for when we are building health tech startups in the UK? I would like to say that we are optimizing for patient outcomes, but we very rarely, unfortunately, are optimizing for patient outcomes when it comes to developing digital health in the UK. And what we are optimizing for, as I'm sure you can both then guess, is the bottom line of the trust. How is the innovation you're developing going to save money for the trust? And we're not talking how is this going to save money by reducing, cardiac events in 20 years' time amongst our patient base. We're talking about how is this going to save money next month for the trust? Because trust, unfortunately, in the current state of the NHS, we know the NHS is propped up on goodwill. There simply isn't enough money to fund an increasingly aging and comorbid population. And that is why we can't really, it's a chicken and egg, because health tech companies want to run pilots to basically find data to back up them raising more money so that they can develop more innovation. The NHS is incredibly reluctant for startups to run pilots because it takes time and it takes manpower and it takes all sorts of other things. And therefore, once again, it's a chicken and egg. You can't generate the real world evidence because trusts and ICBs aren't necessarily, they're playing hardball because they don't have the infrastructure to even run these pilots. And then when you have enough data to say, okay, we're going to raise more money and try and implement innovation within the NHS, well, you saying we think we can improve patient outcomes by X. Well, they say, well, how are you going to save the bottom line? Like at our CEO's board meeting on a quarterly basis, how can we justify spending X £1,000 on your product if it's only going to save us Y £1,000? So at the end of the day, this all really comes down to money. And unfortunately, yes, it comes down to patient outcomes as well. But in my, I don't have a breadth of experience or like a hugely depth of experience either. But if you're not saving the NHS money, your innovation is going to die. And if it's not going to save money quickly, it's also going to die. If it's improving mortality rates over a 10-year, 20-year period or improving patient outcomes, but it's not saving money in terms of how much also they're going to be spending on your product will die. So essentially, all the stars need to align. And that is also what makes developing within the health tech space so challenging.
Yeah, it is. It seems very complex and lots of moving parts that, yeah, as you said, need to align. I feel like we've gone quite deep into health tech and it's sort of the landscape and all that without really asking about you and how you are. But
I'm all right, Martin. Thanks.
What is it? Yeah, we just used you for your knowledge there. How are you? No. What are you up to at the moment, Azeem? What fills your days?
That's a good question. I think, well, what fills my day on a practical level is I'm still working in the NHS. I'm clinging on for dear life. I'm a radiology registrar at the moment, around halfway through my training. So I spend a couple of days a week still in the hospital and doing, kind of, as I said, plodding along through my training. I'm planning to take some time out and move back into the health tech space for at least 1 or 2 years. If my educational supervisor is hearing this, you may be hearing this for the first time, but that is the plan. And yeah, I think a minimum of a year, because I've got the itches again, and I want to scratch it and start building products again, which are impacting patients.
Yeah.
So that's the plans. That takes up a couple of days. I run a startup called Byte, where we basically help to train clinicians to build digital health products. We help them raise money, which is once again like incredible fun. So that takes a couple of days a week, and then the spare time I have is kind of digital health advisory work, a bit of consulting work in the tech space, and I work as a venture scout for a company called eWar. So I help companies raise money by basically acting as a scout for them. So very very diverse week, but that's broadly speaking how I'm spending my time now.
Quite literally more than a medic then.
Yeah, pretty much.
How do you? Okay, so and a question that came to mind was when I'm doing things like when I'm studying for my MLA now, I get about 2 or 3 questions in, and then I just get a bit of an itch to work on more the medics or do something else. I'm very distracted like that. If you're doing that many things, how are you able to sort of be good at each single thing and give it sort of the time that it deserves and the concentration that it deserves? Because I can barely do it with like 2 or 3 things. So how do you do that? How do you manage so many things? Because everyone raves about portfolio careers. Us as more than most, more so than most. But how does it actually work for someone who actually is doing that yourself?
It's hard, and I think, I mean, there's kind of modifiable and non-modifiable things here. If you wanted to get a bit medical about it, in that the non-modifiable, the main non-modifiable thing is how your brain is wired. To be honest, my partner, for example, she is not wired to be like this, and she finds my career very strange. She's a lawyer, and she was, she's trained to be a lawyer. She became a lawyer. She's is a lawyer, and she's been doing it for a long
Is
time.
lawyering,
And
yeah.
she's a lawyer. And lawyers 5 days a week, and I'm like, that I can't imagine doing, and I can't imagine doing just one thing for 5 days a week. But her brain is wired in such a way, which is she loves the work she does. She's a human rights lawyer, and she does that 5 days a week, and she impacts people in an incredible way. She can't imagine filling that time with anything else. So I think my brain has always been wired slightly differently, as cliche as that might sound, in that I almost need to be not necessarily context switching all the time, but I need to be focusing on different things throughout the week to keep me almost interested. I think for me, part of the feeling of just being alive in the workplace or in the work that you do is trying to be reasonably good at multiple things. I think what I always found quite difficult as a medic generally is, particularly as you specialize and then even subspecialize even further, is you become really incredible, often at something incredibly niche. And particularly if you're combining that with academia as well. And that just really didn't float my boat. And I think I realized that
Mm.
probably at the end of medical school. So that's kind of the non-modifiable side. And then in terms of modifiable, like how do you actually manage to do it? That is hard. I think it's being very strict with your time. And, when I said this on Jing's podcast, Alpha Program recently, is that like, it is, how do you, when I'm in the hospital, I have to be there for patients and I have to be working as a doctor. I cannot be taking meetings and my mind cannot be elsewhere, and being very strict with my time and where my head is at, essentially. And similarly, if I'm in a business meeting, but I'm thinking about a scan I've reported, you can't allow that context switching on an hourly basis to occur. I think you time, well, this is what I do anyway. I time box it. Like, I wake up in the morning, I create either a mental or a physical list of what needs to be achieved that day. If during the day I'm in the hospital and in the evening I'm doing business stuff, well, those have very clearly defined timelines. Because if you are going beyond that, or work is spilling over one another, and that's different types of work, that is a recipe for burnout in my experience. And I have burnt out a couple of times. And also, you want to have a social life, you want to build relationships, you want to spend time with your family, you want to do things that are important for you, whether that's your faith or extracurricular activities, etc. And how you do all of that whilst context switching and trying to be good at multiple things you can't really do all of it. And that's why it's just being super strict with your time and making time for the other things in your life beyond just the work that you're doing.
Yeah, there's no real golden bullet. We ask this question too often, because there is no real answer. You sort of just you manage your time, you make sure you delineate when you do what, and that's sort of all there is to it. It seems. I from that podcast, I listened to it, and you were saying how you like got into an academic surgical post in London. You had an induction like the week before or something, or a couple of weeks before, and you just thought it wasn't for you. And I think it's colloquial, but I think I think I relate to you on that, in that aspect. Like, I don't think I can commit all my energy into one specific niche thing and do it day in, day out. And it felt like from the podcast that it's sort of a similar vibe with you. Like, those people who are in surgery, they're brilliant, but they love it, and that's all they want to do, and that's fine. And that is the non-modifiable. I like how you categorized it. I think, my non-modifiable is very much, or my non-modifiable factors are very much similar to yours in that respect.
And I guess on linked to that point is you kind of want your surgeon to be deeply obsessed with the work that they're doing, right? You want your radiologist to be like, I can't wait to report this CT scan. And that's not me.
Is that what you feel?
But I guess, surgery is what I was planning to do is you don't want a surgeon, whipping out your appendix, but thinking about some startup that they have to be working on in a couple of hours. Yeah. You want them to be deeply, obsessed is a strong word, but like, a lot of my surgical friends are, that is their love. Like, they love being in theatre, they love using their hands. And I think if you are a surgical trainee listening to this and you get to the point where you realize that there is something else you want to be doing beyond what I've just described there, then I think you probably need to have a real think and look at yourself in the mirror and think, why am I doing what I'm doing? Because, there are career paths in medicine which you will have to really dedicate your life to, and it becomes your craft, essentially. You can't take, 2 years out and, try a different career path when you're a surgeon, because it's patients' lives are literally there in your hands. So, anyway, that's a little bit of my ramble in the defense of surgeons who love their career, because I think that's really what they should
do. Yeah. But so my question is then, how did you, so you applied for this post, you've done all the research, all the dog work, essentially, all the things that you need to do to get in. How did it get to that stage, like that final stage, for you only to realize that it wasn't for you? Do you think there's do you think we need to think more as medics as where we want to go with our lives and with our careers? And was that something that maybe you didn't do as much that you hoped you would have? How did that happen for you?
I think the general rule of thumb that I've seen in life is, like, when something is moving in a certain trajectory, unless you are very, very conscious and deliberate in questioning why you're moving in that direction. Now, whether that is professionally, in relationships, etc., unless you're quite deliberate in that thinking, you will hurtle towards whatever is at the end of that road, whether you like it or not. And I think for me, that's what surgery was. I made a decision relatively early on for the right or the wrong reasons. It's hard to say. Like, my dad is a surgeon, his dad was a surgeon, my mum's dad was a surgeon. I thought, in terms of street cred, you're saying you're a surgeon, that's
you're street cred,
right? Big street. Yeah. So I was like, this is a great career path to go down. And also, I think as a lot of medics are, we're inherently quite type A competitive people. Like, that's a broad generalization. And I thought, becoming an academic surgeon in central London is probably one of the more competitive things you could do. So I was like, let's just strive for that. Let's try and be the best at one of the harder specialties, without question. And I'm talking about 19, 20 years old. And I think it took me another 5 years, 6 years to properly get out of that mindset of, those aren't the reasons you should be doing things. You should be doing things because your parents have done them. You shouldn't be doing things because your parents are telling you to do them. You shouldn't be doing things for glory, really. A lot of that is ego speaking and hubris speaking. And that is the downfall of many of us, myself included, when I came to that realization, is a lot of the walls you build up around yourself and the things that you're trying to build in terms of a career will come crumbling down when you, I say you, but this is me really speaking, like when I took the time to kind of look myself in the mirror and say, why am I doing any of this? Why did I
Yeah.
keep publishing? Why did I keep doing presentations? It all fell down very, very quickly. So I'd say I started academia and started with this vague idea of becoming a surgeon. Yeah, like I said, kind of 20-ish years old. And I'd started the academic training program at roughly 27 years old, 26 years old. So we're talking kind of 6, 7 years of all of this in the making. And then I guess for me anyway, like my faith is very important. So I guess just praying with others, praying by myself, and as I said, realizing that a lot of what I was doing was either to please other people or for my own ego, not for who I really am and what I really want from my professional career. And as I said, it goes back to my initial point, which is if something is moving in a certain direction, unless you kind of take those moments for whatever reason, those moments arise, you'll keep
Yeah.
hurtling towards whatever is at the end of that path. And for me, that would have been a very unsatisfied, 37, 38-year-old, probably postdoc academic surgical, trainee about to become a consultant, and really not happy with my professional life. And I could see that vision very, very clearly as soon as I in the process of making that decision, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point because even we get medics coming to us being like, should I do this research paper? Should I present this thing? Should I do that thing? And I ask them like, are you actually interested in research or are you actually interested in this project? The majority of the time they're like, no, but it's just for the CV or it's just to get into, like the training pathways. And I appreciate obviously now there's increasing competition ratios where you kind of need to have that portfolio. But then I think the thing that all medics need to realize, like you said, is you need to actually look at every opportunity or the decisions you're making and actually think like, am I doing this for myself? Like, am I truly passionate about it? Because also, if you don't think it's the right thing for you, or you don't actually love what you're doing, then you're not actually going to put that 100% effort into it. So I think it's a really important point.
I just want to caveat that as well by saying, I think sometimes you need to do things you don't like to get to work the things that you like. So like research, for instance, I think it's a means to an end. On one of the podcasts, I heard you say like you're F2, F3 or something, and you said, "Oh yeah, and I've done like 40 to 50 research papers at this point," and so casually. So, is research a means to an end for you, or do you actually enjoy that?
I think at the time it was something similar to what Yasmin was alluding to, is I knew how competitive things were. And once again, it was kind of stroking an ego a little bit. I was like, if I can get to the end of med school with 10, 15 papers, like that'll be pretty good, and I'll probably get like an academic foundation job in London, and I can be, I will.
It is the metric of success for doctors, at least.
Yeah, pretty like it's a awful metric of success, but it is one of them, right? So for me, once again, this is in hindsight, and hindsight's always 2020, as we say, but like it is. Looking back on it, it was a lot of it was that. I think there was a significant portion as well, which was how like I did enjoy trying to solve really complex problems in academia and then kind of publishing that research in the hope someone would read it. Whether anyone read my papers, I still don't know to this day. They've got some citations, which is great. But at the end of the day,
I came across one actually. I was doing a scoping review and I came across a commentary you did.
No way.
So,
wow.
Yeah, genuinely. I didn't include it. Sorry.
That's all right. I forgive you. I think, yeah, it was my first taste of like taking a complex problem, trying to solve it, trying to then write something about it, trying to publish it, which very broadly speaking is kind of what tech is like trying to validate a problem, trying to come up with a solution and hoping that by coming up with that solution, you can impact patient care at scale. So, but there were plenty of things I absolutely, well, despise is a strong word, but really do not like about academia. But I think broadly speaking, it was a great experience, I guess, just learning a new skill set. And I think particularly within the health tech space, there is a huge role for clinical academics throughout health tech. So I don't regret a moment of it. And I would not be where I am now without having gone through that experience. But I think I probably in the early days was doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's all about doing it for the right reason. So ultimately, yes, I do agree with you, Martin, that it is a means to end where you sometimes have to do research for an application or something like that. But like you said, Azim, like you can actually choose the research project that you do. And if you choose in something that you're interested in, then ultimately you'll enjoy that process and you'll get those skill sets out of it that you've mentioned. You've mentioned about you love problem solving and fixing a problem. Kind of then wanted to kind of allude to the fact that you created Byte. Was it Byte Medicine at the time before it became Byte World?
So yeah, the
Um,
Buzz product. Yeah, that's right.
so what problem were you trying to solve at that time, which led you to create Byte Medicine, which is now Byte World?
So I was living in the US. I was living in LA between kind of 2019, 2020-ish. And I came back, and I've said this on a number of podcasts. I won't repeat it all, but
You have.
I came back
Yeah.
just before COVID, and kind of well, I guess I realized that, all the medical schools were shut down. No exams were not optimized for online delivery. Learning was not optimized for online delivery. And there were thousands of medical students and healthcare students generally sitting at home without much to do, wanting to help, but also wanting to learn. So long story short, put together a group of friends and said, how do we deliver some kind of online learning for healthcare students across the UK initially to essentially help them to keep learning, but also particularly the final year medical students, can this help them to get into the COVID workforce as fast as possible? So we put together a platform and literally just started running daily Zoom webinars for essentially almost a year and a half to try and get people more engaged in their medical education whilst everything was essentially cancelled. So we started out very small, had 10 people turn up, 50 people turn up, then 100 people turn up, and then eventually around 1,000 people turning up to each of those webinars. And that was learning everything from how do you manage a myocardial infarction, what is small bowel obstruction, so on and so forth. And that is kind of the first, I guess, my first attempt at trying to solve an inverted commas a problem. It's not a particularly sexy solution. It is not massively tech enabled. I mean, there ends up being a tech platform with question banks, all the classic medical education stuff. But essentially, the problem was very clear. The solution felt quite straightforward. You then just hire as many people as you can to deliver that learning, and you become, well, what we ended up becoming was, I think, the UK's largest medical education content provider during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that helped a lot of final year med students then get into the COVID workforce sooner than they would have. So that was essentially the problem and the solution we came up with at the time.
Awesome. And now, what has that become? And I want you to actually flex your numbers and all this, just so that so the audience know how much impact you're making.
Yeah. So this, I guess, Byte Medicine then, broadly speaking, became Byte World, which is the parent company. So Byte Medicine, we trained over around 3 years, 250,000 healthcare students across, I can't remember how many countries, but every country you could possibly imagine, which is pretty awesome. We did a pre-seed round. We raised a reasonable amount of money, then grew out the team. We built the next part of the business, which was Byte Labs digital health side, which was training clinicians to build digital health products. We've trained just under 1,000 fellows over the past 2.5 years. Those fellows have gone on to raise over a couple of $1 million in capital for the startups they've developed. We've helped place around 200 doctors into roles, or clinicians generally into roles within the digital health space. We then went on to do advisory work with the Lord Mayor, the King and his private secretaries. We, were invited to the coronation. We got on the New Year's honors list. We once again, all of this is by the grace of someone far greater than I, and also by the teamwork from people who are far more talented than I am. I cannot take the credit for really any of this. This is largely speaking the work of really, really incredible people around me, and very focused and diligent people. So I think going back to Martin's point of really exploring things to even know what you enjoy doing, I think I took an F3, F4, F5. I kind of lost track, maybe like F5.5. So I took multiple years out, and growing this business has been kind of one of the greatest privileges of my professional career. And there are a few anecdotes I give about building this business. One I've probably not given before is, I remember when we were right at the early stages of developing Bytes, which was the precursor to Byte Medicine, actually, which was just running events in dodgy hotel basements with really bad air conditioning, that kind of thing, to try and build some, to put together a little bit of money to then eventually build what we didn't know what it was going to be, but it ended up being biomedicine. So we were running a very kind of hacky medical education company even before COVID, which was Oski Bytes. And I remember we were putting together this textbook, and Schwabe, one of my co-founders, and I were working at St. Thomas's Hospital, which for those of you who don't know, is kind of just by the river overlooking House of Parliament. And it must have been 4 a.m. and we were wandering down that street. We were post a day shift, then writing our textbook over the night, and then sleeping in the library to then go back to work. And we just wandered past that, but past the river, and we looked out House of Parliament, and we were like, what an incredible place to be able to build a company. And then I remember almost 5 years to the day, we all walked along that exact same place. And this was the day before the King's coronation, where we'd been invited because of all of this work. And I guess that was the moment of like true gratitude for the incredible accomplishments that the company has made over, a relatively short period of time. I think it was around 4 or 5 years, and the scale of what we had built. So I think and as I said on previous podcasts, this was a question of, borrowing paper from the urology wards at St. Thomas's at 4 a.m. because we didn't have enough funds to necessarily like print out thousands of pieces of paper. So it was a very hacky approach to the business, but it comes down to figuring out what you want. And I think I realized at that point that I just loved building products and impacting as many people as I could.
Yeah, you got a little investiture as well. I see the BEM at the end of your name. It's quite nice. That's very nice. Yeah. Okay. No, it's amazing what you've done. And all, I guess, to help other clinicians, other medics, get into health tech. And you've done a brilliant job at it. What would you say are the main sort of things that? So Byte Labs is like an 8-week program. Am I right in thinking? They sort of build an innovation. It's sort of you're doing something, you're building something, and then there's like you're pitching at the end and investment opportunities, I think. What would you say are some of the is it mainly like soft skills that that medics need, and like sort of a slight sort of change of how they view things? Or is it like just hard skills, like lean canvas and all these business things?
I think there's 2 sets of 3 things really. So in terms of broadly speaking, the 3 things are the skills, knowledge, and experience, or in terms of what we're trying to provide clinicians and students who want to build in the digital health space. So the skills being the more technical, deep knowledge or kind of deep components that you need. So lean canvas being one of them. The knowledge is more broad in terms of what does regulation in the UK look like if you're trying to build a product? How do you commercialize in the UK when you're trying to build a product? Clinical product management, like the list goes on. And that is all over 8 weeks. And then experience is building the connections with the network that we have within the UK of largely ex-clinicians who have now gone on to build digital health companies or join larger digital health companies. So there's a combination of those components. The key one is actually what you mentioned there, Martin, which isn't what I said, which is the mindset shift that is needed. And there's 2 things here, in that clinicians within healthcare are notoriously good. I'm going to phrase this in a strange way, notoriously good at underselling themselves. So they aren't very good at, blowing their own trumpet. I'm certainly still not very good at that. They're not good at writing CVs because they feel awkward, like writing their achievements, but also importantly, they're not sure how to frame their achievements. So we take a lot of things the NHS takes a lot of things for granted in terms of the work that clinicians do. So for example, if you do a closed loop audit, no clinician is getting paid to do a closed loop audit, but a lot of the closed loop audits have significant impact on patient care, either within one department or an entire trust, or sometimes even beyond that. And I've read CVs where I said, why have you not mentioned that some audit that you did improved, workflow efficiency by 70% across 6 month period. Well, it was a quip, it was a quality improvement project. Well, you don't understand that the value you're providing to your organization, just because the organization doesn't remunerate you for it, which they should, but anyway, that's a different point, does not mean that that is not incredibly valuable evidence for the skills that you have. So it's really reframing how clinicians view themselves as like really like we are subject matter expertise in the work that we do, but then also reframing what we've done to be more relevant to the tech space, essentially. So it's a combination of technical, non-technical, but also a mindset thing. And then we also obviously we deliver this as a postgraduate diploma as well, so you can have something formal on your CV. And then if people are interested in jobs, we try and help them. If people are interested in raising money, we try and help them with that. But the end of the funnel is often quite broad.
Yeah.
And the people you have for your fellowship program, what are the people? What kind of people are you looking for? So if it all actually, I'll reframe the question. What type of person do you have to be to kind of really excel in health tech? Obviously, we've mentioned about someone who likes to solve problems, build things, but kind of outside of that.
So the things that you don't need to be are, you don't need to be technical, you don't need to be a full stack developer, you don't need to be a data scientist. You can be awful at math like I am. Like I don't care, no one cares. What is the number one attribute that we positively select for in Byte Labs is the desire and ability to challenge the status quo. That is very broad, and that is because it is one of the core attributes that the majority of digital health companies look for, particularly when they're looking for clinicians. The reason why I say particularly when they're looking for clinicians is because we are inherently designed, is not the right word, taught to not challenge the status quo throughout medical school. Why? Well, we are taught protocols. We are taught evidence-based guidelines. We are, told to learn the 7th line management for hypertension in over 65-year-olds with an EGFR of, the list goes on and on, right? You are rote learning a lot of things, and you are rote learning a lot of protocols. So where is the space for creativity there? In my experience, medical school stifles your creativity unless you're very deliberate in still kind of latching on to those elements that you had pre-medical school. And so the ability to challenge status quo is to think outside of protocols, to think outside, cliche as it is, to think outside of the box and say, well, why is something being done the way that it's being done, whether it's in your department or otherwise? And challenging this archaic notion in really whichever form it comes, but it's being done like that because that's how it's always been done. Well, that is the most ridiculous reason to do anything within healthcare or outside of healthcare. And I guess within this, once again, very broad, nebulous phrase of challenging the status quo, that is where creativity comes in. That is where focus and being able to put together a timeline of like, why is something being done the way that's why is something being done the way that it's being done? Well, let's dive deeper. Let's understand what is a problem. Why is this a problem? How do we fix this problem? And that is where the core skill of kind of creativity and drive and motivation comes into it. But drive, motivation, etc., is somewhat irrelevant with what Byte Labs is trying to achieve in people's careers if you don't have the first step. If you are not genuinely curious about the world and the things going on around you, the rest is, in my view, and this may be controversial, is irrelevant. You need the starting point for any of the other skills or expertise to be relevant.
I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned. So you said that medical schools is stifling creativity. So what do you think medical schools can do? Or if you had to change something about medical schools, what would you do to try to kind of change how medics are becoming when they come out of medical school? Or even just kind of more broadly, what things are outdated about medical school training?
It's a challenging one to answer because I don't want to ruffle too many feathers. I think we all probably ubiquitously agree that rote learning and didactic lectures should not exist anymore. I don't care if you are the world-renowned 75-year-old professor of cardiology. There is no excuse for you to be standing at the front just talking at 400 people for an hour and then walking off. I'm sorry, like, I just inherently disagree with that. We live in a world where it is not that challenging to learn new skills. I understand it's challenging for some professors who aren't that tech literate, but it's the responsibility of the university to be supporting those individuals. So I would say that's probably not that controversial a thing to say. I think problem-based learning I am a fan of, because I think that it translates quite well into developing digital health problems, and it also, I think, develops good doctors as well, because you can't develop a product unless you know the problem. So I think that I am a fan of. When it comes to how do you teach students in a more effective way to develop better doctors, I'm still not sure of the answer to that. I think that is best asked to someone, professor of pedagogy in medical education. There are plenty of approaches, whether that is, gamification or case-based learning or multi-step SBS, the list goes on. And I may have had a better answer for this a few years ago when I was more in the medical education space, but I do have a strong view on where digital health should be integrated into the curriculum. And that view is that it should, obviously, but
That's good to
the,
know.
the fundamental belief that I have is that in this next generation of doctors, is that, and this is actually paraphrased by a friend of mine called Keith Grimes, who was one of the heads of AI at Babylon Health in its heyday, and he's a GP as well. And essentially, it's that the future clinicians are not going to treat patients just through the patients that they see, but through the products that they build. And I think that summarizes my view quite well, in that it's about taking all of this knowledge and how can you support companies or even build your own company or support the government or advise policy. Like, I don't really care what it is, but something at scale using the knowledge that you have. And there should be hackathons, there should be workshops, you should really be embedding the health tech ecosystem within the UK and beyond into the medical school curriculum. There should be student selected components in digital health. There should be encouragement for medical electives in the digital health space. But you cannot just ignore the world that we're living in because you want to teach the third line management of diabetes. That's super important, and doctors they need to know that. I argue that why do you need to know that for an SBA exam for your final year? I don't know why you need to know the seventh line management for anything, when in reality you're just going to look it up as a protocol or a guideline anyway. Like, the exams should be based on the real world. They shouldn't be based on what is the easiest question for examiners to write. So anyway, very frustrating. Lots of things I could say.
Yeah.
There are a few thoughts.
Yeah, you've articulated it so well, and I'm just wondering, like, why isn't it changing? Like, where are those knights in shining armor that are supposed to save us from
Follow the money.
perils?
It's generally what I say, Martin, is like, it goes back to challenging the status quo. Generally, things are done as they've always been done because it is the easiest approach. When something is moving in a certain direction, it will keep moving unless something is forcing it to realign or to shift. And I think medical education has probably improved somewhat over the last 10 years. I mean, certainly has. But if it's easier and cheaper to do it as always been done, 9 times out of 10, that's what's going to happen. So maybe it's your generation, maybe it's the next one. I don't.
If you're watching, please sort it out. I just wanted to also go back to the sort of idea of how medics fundamentally need to change their sort of perspective and how they look at medtech before they even try to get into the space. But now, suppose we're playing an RPG game and we've upgraded our character with the sort of mindset stuff that they're fully aligned. They know what's up. What are the sort of tangible things now that they need to sort of get? And that may include Byte Labs, or it may include other things. What tangibly do they need to do now to get into health tech, I guess?
If it's getting into health tech, which is the aim, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention some of the other things we've talked about over the past hour or so. Is that why do not embark on this journey of wanting to build digital health products or go into the health tech space without sitting down and questioning why you're doing that. And there are plenty of frameworks to help you do that. But that should always be the starting point for any decision like this, in my experience. And once you've done that and really figured out why and kind of where this fits into your career and X, Y, and Z, you don't need all the answers. Don't get me wrong. Like, you need to be able to make the best decision possible based on the best available evidence you have at the time you're making the decision. That, as humans, that's all we can do, right? So that aside, practically, well, once again, a very cliche phrase, which sounds incredibly Americanized to me, but I do quite like, is that your net worth is your network, or vice versa. Your network is your net worth. And I do totally agree with that. And really get to know people in the space. Go to conferences. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I know it's super awkward and a little bit cringe sometimes to be posting on LinkedIn and to be adding people and all that stuff. I really, really struggle. Like, if I write LinkedIn posts, usually I need one of my friends to draft it for me, and then I edit and post it, just because I like get nauseous at the thought of writing my LinkedIn. Anyway, that aside, if you are a LinkedIn influencer, keep doing what you're doing. It's just
I'm the same as you, man. I'm the same as you.
It takes me like 2 hours to write a post. Like, it takes me so much effort.
Yeah, I'm glad that resonates with you guys.
You're not alone. Yeah, it's just, it needs to be done there at the same time. It's like,
it's tough. It's tough. But I think the key thing, as this panel has kind of demonstrated, is that I'm sure there are people who really love posting on LinkedIn, but usually it's because we all know that it will help us develop a personal brand, help us develop a network, help us, meet people for coffee, meet the people at digital health conferences. You have to really put yourself out there, because, I'll give you some examples. I've applied for a few jobs over the last couple of years in the health tech space. And I think on 3/4 of the panels of the interviews for those jobs are friends of mine. And it's awkward because the people, and you go through multiple stages of interviews. I'm like, oh gosh, it's you. Like, this is brilliant. It's just talking to a friend. And that's like, there's a conflict of interest there. But that aside, it's really important that you develop, once again, cliche as it sounds, this personal brand for yourself and get to know people in this space. That's number one. Yes, you can do programs like Byte Labs. Yes, you can do a master's. Yes, you can do a postgraduate diploma, but they cost money and they take time. So I would prioritize, like, if there's one thing you can do right now, create a LinkedIn profile, make that as robust and full as possible, and start adding people. Add me, please, that's absolutely fine. But that is the lowest hanging fruit and the most important thing you could do right now. Then, yes, you could have a think about programs like Byte Labs and otherwise, but also Coursera has wonderful courses. You can add them onto your LinkedIn profile, and they're really, really practical, and they're developed by Google or IBM, AWS, etc. And that will help you get stuck in almost essentially for free, or like £30 a month or whatever. Like, it's not massively expensive. So there are things that have a higher barrier to entry in terms of price, which is, a master's for £16,000, for example. There are things that have a higher time commitment. So Byte Labs being at the lesser end of 8 weeks, whereas, once again, a master's being at, a year. So consider time and money in that process as well. Yeah. And then, I mean, broadly speaking, those are kind of the two main things you can do. But the first thing, which is knowing people, is really what's going to open the doors, but also help you understand more about the space generally, because you need to know what the digital health landscape is like in this country and where you might even fit in, and bring your subject matter expertise and how this fits into your broader career as well. And then there's clinical entrepreneur programs, there's Royal Society of Medicine events and prizes and things that you can aim for. There's AI fellowships, and the old NHS England essentially has AI fellowships, and there's plenty of things for medical students getting involved in your societies and things as well. So the list is quite broad, but I'd say it's actionable things first.
Yeah, I think you've made it abundantly clear that it's more so the mindset and literally just going out there and getting started, getting networking, as opposed to the tangibles. So yeah, no, but there's a reason people find a sort of visceral disgust with LinkedIn is because it's like this whole networking thing where it feels very transactional. It doesn't feel real. You've been in the game for a while. You've seen it happen. You've been part of it. You've had it happen to you. How does one navigate this in a humane way? Like, how do you make real connections as opposed to just trying to get something out of someone?
Yeah, and this is, I mean, it's still something I grapple with because it's really hard to come across as genuine on a platform like LinkedIn. So I think generally, like introductions through friends of friends, always like I mean, essentially warm introductions is how we describe them. Always come across as more genuine, but you can only get warm introductions once you have the initial kind of first degree connections. So what I tended to
Yeah.
do right at my earlier stages of like the digital health space is you try and offer. It's how you frame a request essentially. So use someone's name, compliment them about something that they've achieved or something that they've done. So you're contacting someone who's built a digital health, kind of like, I absolutely love the work that you do, and be really, really specific as to why you love it and what you love about it. Say very briefly who you are, and like I would love to chat to you for 15 minutes on a call or remotely, and just and then be as specific as you can. Say like I want to build within the digital health space and provide like support you as much as I can, or keep it as broad, like depending on your skill set. Like if you can offer something, even better. I'm not saying you offered to do an unpaid internship, but if there's something you can offer in return, fantastic. Because then essentially what you're framed here is personalized introduction, a personalized compliment, which is obviously has to be genuine, a very brief introduction to yourself about yourself, what the ask is. So a brief chat, coffee, whatever it may be, and like I would love to support the work that you're doing as well. But the key thing is, if you're reaching out to people, myself included, is people's attention spans are incredibly short. So if you're writing an 8-line LinkedIn message, no one is gonna, I mean, let alone reply to that, no one's gonna read it. So it's the art of this cold outreach and making things concise, but it's also a numbers game. So let's say 5% of people reply. Well, if you're only messaging 10 people, no one's going to reply. So, and also you can't be spammy. It has to be authentic. So it's like, it's a lot of like, it's challenging,
It's an
but
art form, yeah.
yeah, you only need, I would say, like, don't focus on becoming best friends with 100 people in the digital health space. Say, like, can you essentially find 2 people who are established in this space to get on a call with or to help guide you in some way? And ideally face to face, because you, like you said, like both of you said, like, you don't want this to be transactional. You want this to be like a relationship that you've forged, and you can get to know this person over 10 years, and who knows where your careers are going to go. That's kind of the mindset I would recommend you going into chatting with anyone in this space, not just, I want to learn about you, I want to tell you about me, give me a job. It needs to be authentic.
Yeah, I guess it's about the quality of those networks and relationships, not the quantity of them.
Yeah.
And that's really nice practical advice, actually. One thing that I wanted to touch upon as we kind of come to a close is you've mentioned it's really important for medics to understand their why. And you've also referred to the fact that your why relates to the impact, creating an impact, challenging the status quo. And as I reflect on my why, on why I do certain things, I think it for me comes down to faith. And I think you also referred to this too, throughout the call. So I just wanted to kind of explore that a bit further and understand, how has your faith background influenced the way you approach your medical career and leadership? And how do those values guide the decisions that you've made?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question. And I think, as I said before the podcast, like exploring this side of me is not really something that I've done on a podcast before. But yeah, I am, my both my parents are Christian by background. My mum's side is all Muslim by background. Her extended family and my dad's side are all Christian. So I was raised kind of with both faiths growing up. And I think I didn't really get into my Christian faith that much until probably my mid-ish 20s or like early to mid 20s. And this was when I kind of did a very deep, I think, I guess I explored comparative religion within the Abrahamic religions very, very deeply. And
Did
I
you do like a systematic review? Did you like
I mean,
compare the pros
essentially,
and cons?
I think like even when I was at medical school, like my friends made fun of me saying like you probably studied like Islamic and Christian theology far more than you studied medicine, and I think that's pretty accurate, to be honest with you.
But it's
Uh,
fair, isn't it? I mean, it's a cornerstone of our lives if we choose to have a faith or religion. So yeah,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
but go on.
And I think I guess my premise here is that I love all faiths. I'm not here to necessarily try and convert anyone to Christianity. That's not what I'm here to do. But I'm just sharing my journey, and I think similar to what you just said there, Martin. I think everyone has a responsibility to really understand why they believe what they believe. Similarly to like why do the work that you do, and it comes back to essentially it's a nice way to kind of wrap everything together. Is like it's just questioning things, and I was always encouraged to do that when I was younger. So I spent many years doing it. And I had my own personal journeys of visions and dreams and things, but I really needed a strong theological basis behind why people say the Bible is corrupt, and actually is that true? Like if Jesus is God, then how is Jesus praying to himself? Why are there Bible verses saying that the Father is greater than I am? Like really inherent things about the purest form of Christianity, which is, once again, I don't want to get too theological about it, but
No, it's good. Yeah.
what has happened is that I think the thing that I realized is the crucifix and the crucifixion of Christ is something which has become watered down even for myself. Like the image of the crucifix is one of the most devastatingly painful ways for someone to die. And I only really thought about this when I read a book by Tom Holland, who's doesn't really call himself a Christian anymore. He's an incredibly famous historian, and he's not Spider-Man. It's a different Tom Holland.
Yeah.
And he talked like we don't really think about the fact that you know you are standing out there on a you're nailed to a cross with a crown of thorns on your head. You are emaciated. You're not ripped with six-pack abs like you see on the images of Christ. You are emaciated. You have crows like gouging your eyes out. You have a spear put into your side, and it is the most gruesome death that was really essentially just for slaves, for criminals, for murderers, etc. And my belief is that Christ is God and the Son of God, and to see essentially God lower himself to that level of humiliation and pain and torture, knowing that he didn't have to do that, but out of pure selfless love, like that is what guides my entire career. And I'd like to say everything that I do. And I think when it comes to leadership and how do you guide a company when you're building a company in the modern day and age, and how do you manage a team when things are challenging? I think like this concept of servant leadership is like deeply resonates with me, and was also incredibly challenging. Like there's one part in Matthew 20 where it says, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant, or must be a servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. And like that is fundamentally what I believe is like I want to serve others in the work that I do. I will fall short constantly and consistently, but that is what motivates me on a day-to-day basis. So I apologize to anyone who is not religious. I apologize for like this rambling answer, but I hope that this resonates with someone.
Yeah. I don't think you should apologize. I think it's beautiful. And I think even when you were saying it then, it was quite potentially like the words you use were quite graphic and intense. It's something that's, I don't know why, it's become a bit of a taboo not to talk about your faith, because despite it being it's such a big part of someone's life. And I think regardless, I think what you've said there, especially how aspects of the Bible sort of ring true to the way you live your life and in business as well. I think there's a lot of truths in the Bible, regardless of if Christianity is true or not, that are true, I guess, and that do work and that do help in people's lives. And Yaz, you're a Muslim yourself. What are your sort of reflections on that?
Yeah, I think ultimately, faith and spirituality gives you those morals and values to kind of put forward in your life, and that aspect of like servant leadership. Ultimately, I think that's something that ultimately can guide you in the way you do. Like even for example, that description you gave about Jesus, like the aspect of Jesus being the Son of God, etc., but lowering himself down to others. That's kind of what we do on a daily basis. Like even as a leader, you're not just the head of everyone else. You have to kind of ground yourself down with everyone else, the people in your team, to ultimately serve a bigger purpose, serve the impact that you want to make. So I think that's a beautiful description. And I love the fact that you went into it actually in a bit more detail, because I think ultimately, even if you don't have a faith, there's probably an aspect of spirituality that you might have, and that will ultimately guide people. And I think that's something important to talk about, especially within healthcare, and within leadership. So thank you so much for sharing.
No, of course, and I think there's so much beauty in all faiths, and there are elements of what I've described which are obviously not limited to Christianity, and like in Islam as well. There are similar I guess concepts when it comes to like the first being last, last being first. Like those exist to some degree in Islam and in in Judaism and some of the other not like polytheistic religions. So I think there are elements I think everyone can learn from, whether you're spiritual or religious or not. I think it's just religion has such a massive impact in terms of breadth of scale, like the fact that billions of people follow faith, but then also the depth of how much they impact people's lives, both knowingly and unknowingly, in both our professional lives and our relationships. That I think it's just very refreshing to be able to talk about it with people and being like receptive to that.
Yeah. It feels like a sin, I guess I should say, to now go on to something less important than that. So I think I don't know. Yeah, maybe we sort of finished there. Azeem, it's been brilliant talking to you, and so nice to explore these areas that I didn't know about you. So yeah, no, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.